Hey, welcome back to the Pink Room, a podcast that is dedicated to my cancer battle and my journey, my painting, raising kids, relationships, all those type of things. I always like to start by saying I have 0 subscriber count. This is episode -2 as we get ready to go to episode 1. We're going to do everything we can to sort of keep things moving, and we'll have you can find us on Spotify and Amazon, and on our YouTube channel for those of you that just want to look at my bad lit face as we go through this story. But last we left, we were in the middle section of bringing everybody up to date to what's been going on with me. So when we last left, I had been admitted to the hospital and had my surgeries. I had my colon fixed by Dr. Jennings, brilliant doctor here in town at Memorial Hospital. I was able to navigate those surgeries well. Ended up 100% good with the colon. My liver was left in a situation where I have 9 tumors. And at the time, they encompassed about 85% of my liver. And prior to the surgery, the doctors had given me about 3 weeks to live. Immediately after the surgery, my oncologist told me that I had about 9 months if we didn't start treatment. So we started treatment immediately, and we picked up from there. I eventually made it out of the hospital, right? Just in time to go on a beach vacation with the family. And let me tell you, a beach vacation right out of surgery, your first major surgeries, and also on chemotherapy was something else. I barely remember it, right? And of course, I'm just trying so hard for my kids, keeping them happy, feeding them crab legs, hanging out with them. I did get in the pool once, made it to the beach once in 7 days. And it was a rough week, right? I mean, I was escorted in and out of bed. It was something else. And I thought that was the norm for my life. I really didn't know how my recovery would go. About 4 weeks after returning home from the hospital, my doctors suggested that I get an iron transfusion. And my iron had been bottomed out for a couple of years leading up to this, right? That was the major contributing factor to the fatigue that I had been going through since I had passed out on that fateful day on the food truck. So I got an iron transfusion. Well, let me tell you, this thing turned me into Superman. It was like taking some sort of super serum within moments of getting this iron transfusion, and then so the beach trip didn't go that well, but this iron transfusion had really boosted me to a level where I was able to function again, right? And that continued for the next couple of weeks. I started to get my strength back, and my focus became less on surviving and more on what my plan moving forward was. Well, this is when there became this great moment in my life. 2 things really occurred simultaneously. One of them we'll talk about a lot on this podcast, and people are incredibly cynical about, and that is me finding religion, me finding God, and me, for the first time in my life, having a full understanding of what having faith in something and belief in something really was. Now, prior to me getting cancer, I had looked at people that find religion as they are facing death in a way where I was very cynical about it, very negative about it, right? And you think, oh, they're just doing this because. And the reality is that's a true statement, right? But these things that change our life, these things that affect us greatly, are typically events that occur within our life. So I was very open to this idea. And at that time, a large portion of this decision came from the fact that the people I thought would be there for me, the closest people to me, were not really the people who ended up being there for me. People that came out of the woodwork that I never would have suspected that were there for me in this greatest time of need really surprised me. And then there are people that turned their backs on me, many to this day, that I never would have thought that was the case. And the truth is, as I started to parse these people out into groups, what I found was the more religious, the more Christian the person, the more likely it was that they reached out to me and took care of me and were worried about me and did things for me and took action for me. And the opposite group, that wasn't true. And it just became fascinating to me, right, as I was exploring this sort of new moment in my life where death could be a reality, right? And I started to think about leaving my kids behind and what would guide them and help them. And at the same time, the duality of these two struggles I was going with in early summer, the next thing was I was just incredibly lonely. And my first initial thought was, I've got to get back with the girlfriend who had just left me 6 months earlier, right? She had left me. Yes, sure, she had abandoned me when I was sick, and, she didn't know I had cancer, but of course she knew I was sick for well over a year, and I was in the roughest time, and yes, sure, she abandoned me and all these things, but, when you've just survived something like I had, and you're recovering, and you think, well, who do I need? Who do I want by my side? You think of the person who really had loved you the most, right? This is a woman I had seen for 3 years. She had told me she loved me every day. She was very attentive and kind. I could get into her negative qualities, but at that time there was no point in getting into negative qualities. I thought, you know what, she would be great. She would be comforting, and I wouldn't be alone. And she's someone that I was going to marry, someone that I very much was in love with, and to this day I love her to death, despite the fact that as the story unfolds, we probably will never speak again. So I remember reaching out to her in an email and just telling her, hey, listen, I don't know where your life is right now. I don't know what's going on, but I would love to have some sort of relationship with you, no matter what that was. And the reality is I didn't hear anything and went about my life and recovery and all these things for a few weeks. And then the middle of summer, I think I sent her another message, saying, hey, listen, I hadn't heard from you. I don't know if you're getting these messages at all, but it would be really nice. I don't want to intrude on your life. I don't want to be overly demanding, but it would be great if we could reconnect in some way. And when I didn't receive anything from that, I eventually did get a message back in a roundabout way, not necessarily directly from her, but via some other people, that she was seeing someone else. And I thought, well, of course she's seeing someone else. It's been 6 or 7 months and this sort of thing, and she's a very sort of a codependent kind of person, and you need that rebound. You need that giant rebound when you're out of a serious relationship. So in early August, I messaged her and I said, listen, I know you're seeing someone. That's okay. It's it is what it is, but I would still, it would be really nice. You're and comforting and caring, if you had some response to this, because at the time, not only had I rolled back into being very concerned with what she thought and needing her and loving her, but the reality is, I also had this thing that was growing in me where I had a list of people, and she was at the top of the list, a list of people that it seems pretended to love and care about me over my life, and had not said a word to me, knowing what I'm going through. And you got to keep in mind, when you're faced with something like this and this news comes down and everyone finds out, there are people literally that you have been enemies with that put that things aside and come to you and ask you what you want. My ex-wife, my boy's mother, our relationship has been never better since this is going on, because you put a lot of petty things aside and you care about someone who's going through the hardest thing they've ever gone through in their life, and probably harder than anything you've been through in your entire life. So it just sort of was this period where I was really in shock that this woman could be so unkind, just, heart-wrenchingly horrible, right? So as the summer went on, I thought, okay, well, it is what it is. Well, okay, that brings us to the end of summer. And the end of summer is really all where part 2 of this 3-part catching everybody up on the process begins to take hold. This summer I begin to paint. I'm doing a lot of painting, and a lot of so the end of summer. And at the end of summer, I really had built myself up into a real delusional state. I don't know how many of you have been in love in your life. I don't know how many of you have found it a couple of times. But for me, there's a couple of women, this woman and my ex-wife, where you really just sort of have this love that you'll have for them the rest of your life, no matter how things work out. I very much love the mother of my children. I think she's great. Then again, I wouldn't get back with her for anything less than, I would say 3.2 million, right? And that would be for 1 year. That would be for 1 year, right? It would need to be yearly, for sure. But you just love someone and you love them forever and you wish them the best. To this date, I will, admittedly, both these women are the beneficiary on life insurance policies that I have, and one of them is the inheritor of the house that I own. And who knows if that'll change. But I mean, for right now, those are the two women I loved, and despite the fact that I'm not with them, I appreciate and want to take care of them. So as into the summer came, I really had worked myself up into this concept that things might actually work out. I thought, surely this woman who had told me she loved me every day for 3 years and yada yada, all these things, we have a great way of lying to ourselves about things. And I really didn't realize just how angry this woman still was. You got to remember, this is nearing a year after we had broke up and a year since we had even spoke. And I really, in my head, thought that things could work out. But I just didn't realize, one, that she was very angry, and two, unbeknownst to me, she really had been listening to everything I said. And of course, I'm under this delusion that she hadn't heard a word of it, right? So this all ended with last week in August, just after my birthday. I sent her flowers. Well, this proved to be just this crazy event, right? So one Saturday, I sent her flowers. Well, the following Tuesday, the police show up at my door. She has filed a restraining order against me for sending her flowers, right? And the restraining order, of course, is it's an ex parte. It's one of those filings where, like, the other person doesn't have to be there, and they give you 30 days to, show up with your lawyer and that sort of thing. So I immediately call my lawyer and check out these police reports, and the police reports are the police will file anything for a crying person, but basically they don't say anything. They just say this person got flowers, and that's about it. So my lawyer's like, this is crazy, and I'm like, well, I know it's crazy, but here I am, right? So we get ready for the 30 days, and she messages me and basically says, I don't want to have anything to do with you, yada, yada, yada. And I'm thinking to myself, it would have been really nice if you just would have sent that 3 months ago, like a normal human, right? Here's the way this works, for those of you that don't know. First off, in America, if anybody sends you flowers, you can say, who are they from? They have to tell you, and then you can say, I don't want them. Send them back. That's a good message. But another good message is if someone ever reaches out to you and says, hey, listen, I hope you're doing the best. I hope you're great. I'd love to reconcile. I'd love to even just be friends. If you don't want any of that, the proper adult response would be to message them back and say, no, I wouldn't like that. I'm sorry. And that ends it. That's like the end, right? But really, we're not dealing with someone who is wanting to be an adult. What I've discovered is I'm dealing with someone that is literally to this date in the midst of maintaining that anger level. You got to create sort of a fake narrative to leave somebody, and you got to have this big anger, right? And you almost got to make up a story. They're a monster. They're horrible. They're some sort of ninja narcissist. They're a gaslighter. They're all these things, right? And once you sort of have that story, you got to hold on to it as long as it takes you to get over it. And just like you said, I'll love this woman the rest of my life. The truth is, these women that were in love with me, and they will need to maintain these stories for the rest of their life. It requires a lot of energy, and I'm sure you guys have all been around that sort of thing where someone has a just disdain for their ex, and you're like, yeah, like that was 20 years ago, and they still have it, right? It's still some, like, they left the door open somewhere, and you can't make any sense of the story, which gets to part 3. In part 3, I will tell you what she says when the judge looks her dead in the eye and says, why did you break up with him? Oh, trust me, you're going to want to hear about that in part 3. But part 2 will end with the knowing that I have to go to court and me moving on from this situation. It really, part 3 begins where part 2 ends, and it is me. I stop crying to God every night. I stop asking God to bring this woman back to me. I stop asking for things. I stop asking for the goofy, band-loving Ian to stop playing clarinet for a minute and come over and, reconcile with his old friend. I stop asking for anything, and I just tell God, I'm like, listen, here's what we're going to do. I am going to go in any door that you open for me. If the door's closed, I'm not going in. But if the door's open, I'm going to take a look inside. And if I think God's opened that door for me, that's the one I'm going to go in. And that starts my journey in part 3. That really is the beginning of where I am today and being on this podcast. Is making a conscious decision that I'm going to follow the path that God puts in front of me. And I'm going to stop trying to knock down the door into these areas that He's trying to keep shut. And I really feel like the blessing of part 2 was that God kept me away from this woman, from other people, and provided an opportunity for me to be here today. So, as part 2 comes to an end, I will tell you guys. We'll end each podcast normally with a set of responses to some questions you sent in. I really am not at that point in this -3, 2, 1 episode situation. But as we get to episode 1, this would be the area where I'm going to answer any questions. Again, I'm mostly giving my best advice on relationships, religion, breakfast cereals, and anything else, right? But none of it is sort of professional advice. And as always, these podcasts come with the disclaimer that none of this is true, right? I mean, I just can't get on a podcast and tell you exactly the truth about what's going on in my life or anybody else's. You could be liable for slander against people. You could be liable for all sorts of bad reporting if you were to get something wrong. So for the sake of all the lawyers and my sanity and this podcast, everything I've said is made up, right? None of it's true. Any of the names I use are purely coincidental if they happen to be someone's real name. Any of the events that I describe, certainly if they resemble anything that you can Google or seen on the news on someone's Facebook or have heard from someone, it's completely untrue, right? So just keep that in mind as we always move forward, that this is a complete work of fiction, and I'm not to be held liable for any of it. So I appreciate you guys listening to the podcast today, and I hope you join me for part -3, the final part that will lead us up to this Merry Christmas podcast coming your way soon, episode 1 of The Pink Room. Thanks for joining me.